end the stuff with that after my last session here. What we will do now, because we have to integrate it in everything, is we will talk about the assessment of the selectivity of the nervous system. And perhaps this is new. We all know those patients. The patients that come into your clinic, like the patients that David describes, who sometimes walk into his clinic, they have they have neck pain. They have an injury, an MVA, or something else, or they're twisted, or they did something, and they have pain here. They come in and they will say, I have pain here. Nowhere else. No radiation. The person is quite comfortable, has a dry hand, does not sweat, is not uncomfortable, whatever. That is the ideal patient. Basically, that's the patient that you can say, okay, we'll lay down on your back, we will assess that level, and bingo, we go for it. We won't do that, of course, but we might be able to do that. And then we have the patient, the businessman, who is divorced, has 7 children, his mother-in-law visits him every other day, will be fired, is under a lot of stress, and tells you, if I do this, my right ankle hurts. That is also the patient we know. That is the patient that if you even touch the patient, suddenly the patient is going to sweat. And tells you, I cannot sleep at night. I have problems with concentration. Basically, and perhaps it's not a whiner. Perhaps it has to do with something in his nervous system. Of course we have whiners. I mean, everybody knows that. But. So what is symptom magnification? How are we going to put that in there? What I will try to do today is to try to get across an understanding of the selectivity of the nervous system, what it means for us, and how we can recognize it. If I talk with physical therapists and I ask about selectivity, basically nobody knows what I'm talking about. If I talk with a psychologist and we won't ever pretend that we are that, they know it. I mean, it's without a doubt. So perhaps we must get into it a little bit and find out what we can do with it, how we can assess it. And also, that somebody who comes in a certain situation, I mean the man who is divorced and has 7 children and the mother-in-law, etc., he has a low back problem, comes in, you will never do a real hard mobilization with him. You will never do manipulation the first time or the second time. You will try to get it down. So you will make him at ease. Am I right? So you will have a different treatment protocol. How are we going to do it? And again, this is not of the Institute, this is not yet, or whatever. Definition. The ability to discriminate and adapt when an arousal situation of the organism occurs or develops. You're walking down the street, it is night, it is San Antonio, I had that, and suddenly something happens, and you're in a bad neighborhood. So what are you going to do? You're going to jump up, and you're going to open up, and you start sweating, you're going to do everything. And then after a while, you calm down, and you find out what the situation is. So you're going to adapt. So first you are in an alarm situation, and after that you're trying to get yourself into an adaptation phase. We will talk about high selectivity. That is the situation in which the patient is able to inhibit all excessive defense mechanisms and recruit the necessary recovery mechanisms. A low selectivity is the situation in which a patient is not able to discriminate and all defense mechanisms are in full force present. So low selectivity is the person, is the manager who comes in. to your clinic. He's divorced, 7 children, etc., etc. He doesn't know what to do with it. He has an injury somewhere, but he has all his defense mechanisms in separate parts. He has to take care of his stress control. Cortisol, the stress hormone, kicks in, so the tissue regeneration will be less. So these are terms you will hear more in the next couple of days when I'm here. To determine the level of reactivity of the sympathetic nervous system, the following assessments need to be addressed. What you can do with a patient like this is, if you do your history, you can ask him if he has a sleeping pattern problem. Can he sleep? Heart problems, hyperventilation. Does somebody hyperventilate? You can see that. Nausea, dizziness. Not every dizziness is a VBI. Definitely not. It could also be related to sympathetic symptoms. Concentration problems, decreased appetite, hyperhidrosis, blood pressure problems. So that's the first indication that you have. That are also mostly the people with an extensive history, with a medication list from here to the window. Reaction. If you have an arousal situation, we have 2 options to react. Let me see. This will be a little bit later. We will first finish up the assessments. Okay, then we have the assessment of the relation between the pain and the nociceptive source. Sometimes you have patients that come into your clinic and without a foot or whatever, with really a big significant injury. They can handle it perfectly. And then you have somebody who has a finger problem, and it is a huge problem with a lot of pain. So we must assess, is this real, or is this real for us, or is it not? So the level of pain in comparison with the extent of the injury, does the source of the nociception justify the pain reaction of the patient? Ability to discriminate the injury or the dysfunction location, and to describe where the injury, dysfunction, and the source of the pain is. Can somebody describe to you, to us, where the pain is? And of course we know with the shoulder it's harder to do because we have a low innervation per surface unit. But we can try to determine somewhere if it is related or not. Assessment of the extent of referred sensations and referred pain. Does a person have a really big referred pain, and how does it look like? Or is it the person who comes in and say, no, my pain is right here, I have a little bit of radiation over here, but it's right here. And then we have to determine what the pathology is, of course. Assessment of the level of cognition. If somebody comes into you with a low selectivity or is in an alarm phase, then we must find out if they know what's going on. Does the person understand what his or her diagnosis is? Has the patient obtained sufficient information from other healthcare professionals? Sometimes what I see, if somebody comes into my clinic, then a person is not informed at all what's going on. And I think that a patient should be informed. They should know what's going on. So we must find out, is the patient informed or is the patient in limbo? Assessment of the level of fear. Is the patient afraid versus the prognosis or the dysfunction? Or is the patient afraid of underlying causes? Do they think they have cancer? I mean, It's very important to find out what the patient feels. It will help in his recovery process. And also, is the patient afraid of us, of the healthcare professionals? Or is the patient comfortable? And perhaps we must turn this around then. The human body has two options for a reaction in an arousal situation. Basically, this should go a little bit to the front. We have an alarm phase. It is non-specific. The patient does not know what to do. Non-selective. The function of an alarm phase is, because it has definitely a function, is analysis of the stimulus, anticipation and increase of all possible defense mechanisms. So your heart rate will go up. Everything will happen if you're scared or afraid or in a lot of pain. Adaptation phase. We will try to get the patient as soon as possible in an adaptation phase. So out of the arousal situation by damping the pain, getting the pain away, information to the patient, etc., etc. Adaptation phase is a different arousal. It is selective. They know what to do with it. The function is activity control mechanisms, inhibition of all non-relevant activities and sensations. So that's why we have to do this before we talk about supraspinal pain modulation, because this will definitely be a part of it. Selective activity of those parts who are involved in this recovery process. So they can concentrate, they can recruit all those mechanisms and point at the situation. Really what they need. So the stress level is gone. We've taken care of that. The patient knows what we are talking about, knows that he doesn't have any cancer. So we must create a situation that is excellent for recovery, and that's the adaptation phase. And we have definitely a function in that. What this will mean for us is that in my next talk, if I'm still allowed, of course, in my next talk, we will try to wrap it up. We will go to the tissue injury on a local level, and we will also try to find out how we can do this, and where we go from here. And everything will fall into place. Okay? Lunchtime.
Of what Chris was telling us. Here's somebody that's oversensitized with everything that's going on. Then she's a bit sore. That increases her worry because there's nothing going right in her life. Then she listens to a therapist who's an absolute jerk, as it was, and that sort of further added to the trouble. So here we are in terms of this total arousal state. And I was just saying to Chris at lunchtime how much I appreciated his presentation. Some of it was new to me, some of it kind of reminded me that I'd forgotten some of this important stuff, and I'd better go back again and have a look over that, and that's what's really nice. And one of the things that it did remind me of was a very good analogy that was given once by Chan Gunn at the 1984 IFOMP Congress in Vancouver, when he gave a talk on kind of the neurophysiology of pain and a sort of an integrated system. And he did it. He's a very funny man. He's sort of, I'm not sure he's Chinese or Japanese, but he's a very sort of funny man in terms of the way that he looks at things and the way that he can describe. And so he had this little analogy of pain, okay, that I was saying to Chris, perhaps if he wouldn't mind, I'll just sort of tell it. Here we go. Stick your knee down here, Kathy. If I come along with Kathy here, bang, straight on her knee, okay? Immediately she gets incredible pain. Okay, and then the pain kind of settles down a little bit from this acute nature, and she knows what happened, she knew where I kicked her and so on, But after a while what happens, the knee starts to ache, and probably, and Chris sort of described, and I wasn't aware of all this sort of proximal and distal stuff, but it starts to sort of ache in a more generalized way now, and in fact it has changed now from this acute, precise information to this more generalized aching. Now, if I come across and do it again, then probably it's going to raise the pain because she's already sensitized. This was the sort of thing that he started with. And then he said, now, what I'd like to do is to describe to you the neurocentral pathways of this in 2 minutes. All right, and this was it. What we have here is this building. All right, so we have a kind of concourse that's on the ground here. And we have this tower. And sitting on the top of the tower, okay, we have the headquarters section. This is where the boardroom is. All right? Now, coming up the tower, and perhaps I'll make this tower just a little bit wider. Okay? Coming up this tower here, we've got all kinds of offices. And there are two ways, of course, in any tower that you can go. You can either go by the elevator system, like this, or you can come up by the stair system, which is like this, all right? And each of these we've got floors where people are kind of working. All right? Now it says this is a sort of a company that produces cars, and what we have is the vasomotor, the pseudomotor variety, and the pilomotor variety. And these various models are produced by this company, right? So, what happens now is that there is a big fire down here in the ground floor. Okay, it's observed now by Adam, who is one of the janitorial staff. Okay, with the A delta fibers, Adam. And what Adam does is he sees the fire, he knows where it is, he gets in the elevator, he rushes up to the top, and he informs the boardroom that there is a fire on the left-hand side of the ground floor, and we better do something about it. But at the same time as Adam notices this, his sidekick, who is Charlie, for C fibers, okay, what Charlie does is he sees this fire, and he doesn't take the elevator because the elevator's been taken by Adam. What he does is he takes the staircase. So old Charlie's running up the staircase like this, and every time he gets to a floor, he starts shouting, "Fire! There's a fire!" And then he gets going. And all the people that are in these offices come out and open the doors and looking around. There's a fire. Did you hear this is a fire? And all of them are getting very, did you know where it is? What are we going to do about this? And all this. And he's going up stairway by stairway, and everybody, there's a great hubbub. It's like a Tower of Babel going on here. Everybody rushing out. Nobody knows what the details are, but they all know that there's something going on. And this was the sort of analogy that he gave. And what we get now is this whole sort of increase of activity. All the people from the vasomotor offices and the pseudomotor offices and the pilomotor offices are rushing about. Did you hear about this fire? And so on as we go up, floor by floor. So what's happening with Charlie, he's not disseminating detail of information, he's just disseminating that something major has gone wrong. Adam, he went up by the quick route and he told him exactly what was going wrong and where in fact the fire was. So this is the sort of difference between that wow and this ache that comes on afterwards. And of course it illustrates this principle that we get all of this chronic activity in the autonomic nervous system, particularly the sympathetic nervous system, which sets us up, as we were hearing from Chris, in terms of this inappropriate arousal for everything. And this is what chronic pain will do in terms of keep these autonomic responses high and inappropriately high for anything else that's coming on. Now, I did reveal to you the other first day about the lady that I made a very bad job of. And perhaps that's because I was having a bad day. Perhaps my arousal was not so good because I was kind of a little concerned about coming here and just have I done everything, have I left everything straight? And I didn't want somebody bringing up a complication. You know, that was me. I was probably aroused in the wrong way for this kind of stimulus. But there's another lady that I saw the day before that I was really quite proud of. So let me tell you about her. Because I didn't treat her, well, I did treat her manual therapy, but it was totally not the necessary part of what she needed, but I think she needed somebody just to say something, and I think that the manual therapy was almost a door to open to her in this way. Okay? Here's a very, very odd lady that she came down from the psychiatrist. She's got manic depressive kind of tendencies, or she's manic depressive with schizophrenic tendencies. Okay, so she came into the office and I hadn't had any referrals from this fellow, so I kind of saw his name and I knew who he was, so I kind of wondered a little bit. And when I went into this lady, she said, "Now, I hope you don't get upset by things that I do." So I said, I'm sure I won't get upset, thinking, what on earth is she going to do? And then, without doing anything else, she sort of did this. And then stopped. So she said, "That's what I do." So I said, "Well, were you showing me what you do, or was that the incident, like a proper incident?" No, she said, "No, I wouldn't do that." She said, "Because this is what's causing me the problems." She said, "No, that was a proper incident." So I said to her, "Well, that'll be fine. Now I understand this." But I thought to myself, golly, if I'd just done something to her neck and then she'd start doing like this, there'd have been two of us that needed this psychiatrist. Anyway. First day, I sort of looked at her, and from time to time she went through this, and I just kind of held on to her neck while she did it and kind of just sort of observed and so on. And the next time she came in, she said, "No, I've had more of this since last time." So I kind of thought to myself, well, anything I did couldn't have really done all of this. And in the meantime, I'd spoken to the psychiatrist and he felt that it's not a dystonia. I mean, it didn't look like a dystonia to me in any way. So, and it never happens when she's driving a car. It only happens in sort of these circumstances. Anyway, I sort of started just moving her very gently without any great thing and talking to her. So I said, "How long have you been here?" And she'd been here for a very short time. And I said to her, what are your hopes for the next little while? And she said, with this, I haven't really got any great aspirations. So I said, "Well, can you tell me a little bit about your life? What really interests you?" And the psychiatrist had already told me that this sort of thing had happened in terms of a kind of a religious thing. We're being taken over by the devil or something like this. So I realized that the church was very important to her. So I said to her, "Have you made any contact with the church?" "Oh no," she said, I just couldn't. She said, "What people are taught to think about when I was doing this?" I said, "Well, why don't you speak to the pastor of whichever church you choose and just explain the situation and ask him how the congregation would fit, how this would happen." And I said, "You don't need to sit right on the front row. You could perhaps sit in the rear at the back, and then perhaps nobody'd even notice it because it only lasted a few seconds." I said, "But anyway, you could ask him, and perhaps he could explain to his congregation that they're getting a new member and she's a little bit nervous because she has got this kind of," it was rather more than a minor tick, but I sort of said this to her, that this is sort of these movements. "Oh," she said, "what a good idea." And I said, "Okay, how are you going on with your personal life?" Well, she said, "I've got this boyfriend." I said, "Well, how does he take all this?" Well, she says, he's quite supportive. And so I said, "Well, that's really very good." So we kind of went over that. And then I sort of spoke to her about her exercise. Well, she didn't like to go outside because, people might see her. I said, "Well, perhaps you could drive down to an area where there's not going to be many people in the week anyway. I can tell you'll probably never see anybody. Perhaps that's where you should start taking your walks." Okay, so we got onto that. And then I said to her, "Have you ever thought about any kind of group work with this?" Well, she hadn't thought about this. I said, "Tell you what," I said, "I've had a lot of luck sending people to the Canadian Mental Health Office." I said, "I've sent people there for bereavement counselling and all of this kind of stuff. Why don't you speak to one of their people there and just see if they've got anything to offer you?" So anyway, I saw the next time, and I said, how's the tics? Well, the tics hadn't changed very, this thing hadn't changed very much, and her mother had been staying with her, and there's a bit of stress there, I think. But the last time I saw this woman, I said to her, well, how are things going? She said, I want to tell you. She said, for the last week, I haven't had a single movement. So I said, well, what about your life? What are you doing? Well, she said, I got in touch with the pastor. She said, I went to the church for the first time, and that was really nice. She said, I have going to the mental health group. They're dealing with me on an individual basis, and when I feel ready, they're going to move me into a group. And you know, all of these things were coming on. And then she said to me, now, I know you know this fellow. He's asked me out for coffee. And I said, who is this guy? So she mentioned this guy to me, and I think, oh, God, she doesn't want that guy. She said, would you go out with him? So I said to her, I couldn't think of anything really quite diplomatic to say. So I said, I will tell you no. Okay? So she said, well, thank you for being so honest. Then I suddenly thought about 3 or 4 minutes later, I could have said that a bit better. So I said to her, no, you know, he's a really nice guy. I said, but in actual fact, he's got 1 or 2 problems of his own at the moment, and I don't really think that you should be sort of stressed by anybody else's problems, because things seem to be going on all right. And I said, and anyway, what does your own boyfriend think about you going out with this guy? She said, well, I did say we could both go, and she said he didn't ask me out after that, so I think his plans were a little different. So, you know, here's something of just using manual therapy as a way to make a physical contact with somebody. I mean, I'm not putting myself forward as a psychologist or anything like this, but I certainly know that, you know, any counselling that I've done has been that has been done for me has been helpful, and I certainly know that the men's group that I go to, you know, just talking things out with this group of guys who've got no kind of interest in what I do personally, so we don't talk about work very much, has been most helpful. And so I found that this really sort of swings over. If she'd have mentioned any of this to me probably 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, I would probably have really switched her off, because I wouldn't have known what to do. I would have been nervous about getting into a field of like counselling. And I mean, this isn't counselling in the strict sense of the word, but in fact it probably is, in terms of just giving her opportunity to sort of explore a few of the other things that are available. And so I think within our own setup, and this was particularly brought to me when Chris was talking this morning, how perhaps a reduction of arousal has got nothing to do with treating a joint problem. It's to do with an empathetic person who perhaps needs to you need to be there, and you need to be there necessary for what they do, but they can provide you with some other help. And so there was a case that, you know, I felt better about than the other one. So there was the 2 extremes of treating 2 people that needed help. One that I did not meet the challenge very well, although I really think I recouped the situation to some extent. The other one that I think I may have just sort of said, look, you know, I don't think we've got anything to offer you. In fact, I nearly said that first day. And I think that was handled much, much better. So there's 2 examples that manual therapy is part of what we do, but this other thing, and you know, a lot of the time, who spends the same amount of time with patients as we do in terms of management? Very, very few people. And so I think sometimes that's a good thing for us to just have a little bit of a knowledge about, and not try and become psychologists or psychiatrists ourselves, but certainly be able to direct people perhaps to somebody that can help. And from that point of view, I think it makes us very important. Right. What I'd like to do now is to spend the next while on just